In the forgotten hills of West Virginia, where paved roads give way to gravel paths and time seems to stand still, there exists a family so isolated and so genetically entangled that their story has come to symbolize the disturbing consequences of generational inbreeding in the United States. This is not a myth. It is not folklore. It is real. And at the center of this story is a woman who many believe to be the most inbred individual ever documented in American history. A woman whose life has been defined by silence, deformity, and the brutal legacy of family secrets too dark for daylight. To understand her story, we have to first understand what inbreeding is and why it still happens in places no one wants to look. Inbreeding is the reproduction between close relatives, first cousins, siblings, even parent and child. In genetics, this is dangerous territory. It means identical sets of faulty genes can come together in one child, creating devastating effects: birth defects, cognitive disabilities, facial disfigurements, and behavioral abnormalities. In nature, it's a path toward extinction. In human societies, it's a sign of collapse, a breakdown of social structures, education, and intervention. Yet in remote parts of America, where isolation isn't just geographic but generational, inbreeding becomes a quiet norm. And when it does, stories like this one unfold. Deep within Appalachian America lies a disturbing truth. Poverty and generational neglect aren't just social conditions. They become biological. They pass on not just through behavior, but through blood. And nowhere is this clearer than in the haunting case of the Whitaker family. The Appalachian region, where this woman's family lived, is infamous for both its rugged beauty and its hidden suffering. Spanning parts of 13 states, Appalachia is home to rolling mountains, tight-knit hollers, and deep poverty. For decades, it's been depicted as a forgotten America, a place where coal mines once thrived, and now only ghosts remain. In some pockets of Appalachia, roads don't lead in or out easily. Families settle on land and rarely move. Education levels remain low. Access to healthcare is limited or non-existent. Over time, generations intermarry, sometimes knowingly, sometimes not. And so the cycle continues, hidden under a veil of silence and shame. In these forgotten corners, inbreeding doesn't occur out of malicious intent. It occurs from isolation, from lack of access, from ignorance passed down like an heirloom, and sometimes from a desperation to keep family intact, no matter the cost. In one such Appalachian town called Odd, West Virginia, a name that almost seems prophetic, lives the Whitaker family. The Whitakers are not just any family. They are the most documented case of inbreeding in modern American history, and their story gained public attention when filmmaker and photographer Mark Lighter, through his YouTube series Soft White Underbelly, exposed their lives to the world. What the world saw was heartbreaking, confusing, almost unbelievable. A family with members who communicated only through grunts and gestures. Faces twisted by years of genetic degradation. Lives lived in chaos and neglect. The story of one woman, in particular, stood out. She became the face of the consequences of unchecked generational inbreeding. She doesn't speak, not because she won't, but because she can't. Her facial features are markedly asymmetrical. Her jaw is misaligned. Her eyes dart in opposite directions. Her gait is erratic. Her understanding of the world seems infantile. And yet, behind the silence, there is something haunting, something deeply human. She is not a monster. She is a victim of circumstances beyond her comprehension. A victim of generational decisions made in silence. A life denied the most basic tools of autonomy: language, education, medical care, and choice. How did it come to this? The Whitaker family tree is less a branching lineage and more a circle. Multiple generations of cousins marrying cousins. Siblings living together for decades, some fathering children together. The lack of birth records, legal documentation, or formal schooling makes it nearly impossible to trace who fathered whom. What we know is that this woman, who remains unnamed in public records for her protection, is the result of multiple generations of this cycle. Her condition, both physically and cognitively, is not due to any disease. It is the direct consequence of genetic collapse. But what's even more disturbing is that her life was allowed to continue this way, unchecked, unseen, and uncared for. In most urban areas, a family with these characteristics would trigger investigations by social services. There would be mental health interventions, special education programs, and mandatory reporting. But in places like Odd, those systems simply don't exist or choose not to act. This woman was born into a home without running water, without electricity, and without access to modern education. She never saw a doctor. She never went to school. She never learned how to speak. Her life is one long, uninterrupted silence, echoing the silence of the systems that failed her. She represents every unseen life that America has forgotten to protect. We often hear about generational trauma in academic terms, but this is what it looks like in practice. A young girl born into a shack with no understanding of the world, no tools to escape it, and no hope of change. And it didn't just happen once. It happened over and over again until her very existence became a physical manifestation of that trauma. Her mother, likely also a product of inbreeding, had no way of teaching her different. Her father's identity is uncertain, possibly her uncle, possibly her brother. This is the reality of extreme familial isolation. It bends the rules of morality, legality, and biology. And it forces us to question how many more families like this exist, unseen, unheard, untreated. The most tragic part? No one came to help. Not the government, not medical workers, not educators. For decades, this family lived in the shadows, sometimes mocked by neighbors, sometimes ignored completely. The media never covered them until they were sensationalized on YouTube. And by then, the damage was irreversible. The woman at the center of this story will never recover. She will never learn to speak, to read, to write. Her brain was shaped in a world where none of those things existed. She lives now as she always has, in the background, in silence, in the shadow of the American dream. And the question we must all ask is, why did no one care? The release of the documentary by Mark Lyda caused a media storm. Millions watched in disbelief as the Whitaker family was presented to the world. But for every viewer who responded with compassion, there were just as many who reacted with ridicule. The internet turned their suffering into memes, comment sections filled with cruelty. Some even called for the family to be sterilized, a disturbing echo of America's own eugenics history. But amid the chaos, a question lingered. Why did no one help? How did we allow a woman like this to be born, to live, and to suffer in silence, while pretending we were civilized? What does it say about a nation that lets this happen? Part of the answer lies in America's deeply rooted myth of individualism. Families are private. What happens inside the home is nobody's business. But when privacy turns into pathology, when secrecy breeds suffering, we can no longer look away. This woman's life is a case study in what happens when a society chooses not to see. Her condition is not unique. Similar families exist in Kentucky, in Mississippi, in parts of the Ozarks. And while the details vary, the themes remain the same: poverty, ignorance, abandonment, and silence. The signs are there, we just choose to look away. And each time we do, another life falls through the cracks. The ethical dilemma of telling the story is immense. Are we shining a light on injustice, or are we exploiting human suffering for clicks? The answer depends on how we tell it. With compassion, with context, with honesty. This woman's life is not entertainment. It is a warning, a mirror, a lesson. We must not use her for shock value. We must listen to what her silence is telling us. That there are still people in America living in medieval conditions. That modernity has left some families behind entirely. That silence is not just absence, it's neglect. And sometimes, it's a form of violence. It's easy to blame the family. But in truth, this is a failure of systems. Where were the social workers? The healthcare providers? The educators? Why was this allowed to continue for generations? Why did no one intervene? The woman at the center of this story is the product of collective failure. And that means it's not just her story, it's ours. Inbreeding, while rare, still exists in America. not just among the rural poor but even in elite circles historically. Royals married royals. Wealthy families intermarried to protect assets. But when it happens without consent, without education, without understanding, it becomes abuse. And when it continues unchecked, it becomes tragedy. This woman's life is not just about genetics. It's about human rights, about what it means to be seen, heard, and valued. It's about the minimum standard we must uphold for all people, regardless of where they live or how they were born. There is hope, however small. Since the documentary aired, donations have poured in to help the family. Volunteers have offered aid. Awareness has increased. But none of that changes the reality for the woman at the center of it all. Her life has already been shaped. Her silence is permanent. What we can do now is ensure no one else lives as she did, alone, afraid, and forgotten. This story forces us to confront the dark side of American families, not just the literal inbreeding, but the metaphorical kind too. The way we allow dysfunction to fester in silence. The way we protect abusers in the name of family. The way we turn away from what we don't understand. This woman is the face of all those failures. And her silence screams louder than any words ever could. She will never give an interview. She will never write a memoir. She will never testify in court. But her life testifies to something greater, a truth we've been too afraid to confront. That in the world's richest nation, entire families still suffer in conditions no one should endure. That behind the white picket fences and suburban myths lie stories too painful for dinner conversations. And that until we're ready to face those stories, we will continue to repeat them. The most inbred woman in American history is not a monster. She is not a punchline. She is a human being. And her story deserves more than silence. It deserves outrage. It deserves reform. And above all, it deserves remembrance, not just for her sake, but for every invisible soul suffering in the shadows of America.